Okay, we have a completely new lesson going on here today. As you can see from the title, we're going to now graph. We haven't done any kind of graphing yet with sine and cosine functions. And so that's what's going to happen right now. In this class, we're just going to graph sine and cosine, period. So you're not going to have to worry about what a tangent graph or cosecant or any of those graphs. Just sine and cosine. They're very similar to each other. And so let's do it. Let's start with the most simple version. I think you guys have been in here long enough to know that we'll start with something like this, but eventually I'm going to put plus 2's on the outside. I'll put a number in here, and we'll eventually be shifting and moving these things around. But we want to start, it's all fresh to us, so I'm starting with pretty much the most simple version you could come up with for a sine graph. Y equals sine x. What better way to start a graph than, when you don't know anything about it, than to do this? That really can never fail you. If you understand the math involved in sine and cosine, then you know all we're going to do here, we're going to pick some x values to plug in. We're going to take those values, put them in for x. It's going to give us an answer for the y value. We'll put all those there. And then we're going to graph these points right here. So the trick is you got to know what we're trying to put in here. So first of all, we're always in radians when we're doing these graphs. So when I put in some values for x, remember when you take the sine of something, it's the sine of an angle. So that angle could either be in degrees or radians. And like I said, we're going to do radians. So let's start with 0. And you're going to want to trust me on the first one here. So I'm going to try 0. I'm going to do pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. For starters, we might throw some other things in there, but this should get us going pretty good. So the sine of 0 is 0. You can look it up on your chart, but the sine of 0 is 0, so we're going to put a 0 in for y. And then the sine of pi over 2, so on your chart, pi over 2 is the last thing on the chart, which is 1. So it goes from 0 to 1. I'm skipping over all the pi over 6's and the pi over 4's and all that, and you'll see why here in a second. So this one is 1. Then if you go to pi, it's back to 0. I'll show you some other ways to do this. Like if you think about on the unit circle, and remember this is the point 0, 0. This is the point 0, 1. This is the point -1, 0, and this is the point 0, -1. And the graph we're doing right now is just sine. I'm focusing on sine. And so sine is the y value at these locations. This is the angle 0, right? This is 0. This is pi over 2. This is pi. This is 3 pi over 2, and this is back to 2 pi. So that's the points I'm plugging in here. And like I said, sine is just the y value on the unit circle. So at 0, it was 0. At pi over 2, it's 1. At pi, which is over here, right? This is pi over here. It's back to 0. That's why I wrote a 0 there. And then at 3 pi over 2, which is right here, it's -1. So we'll put a -1 there. And when you get to 2 pi, you're back to 0. Now here's the beautiful thing about the sine graph. If we keep doing this, if we want to go around in this circle more times, we can make this x value larger, but it's just going to keep repeating itself. It's going to go from 2 pi. If we do 3 pi, we'd be still at 0. 4 pi would be at 0. In between there, if we did like 2, this is 0 pi, this is a half a pi, 1 pi, 1.5, 2. If I went 2.5 pi, it'd be back to 1 again. And the cycle is just going to continue. This is called a cyclic function or a cyclical function. Just keeps going and doing the same thing over and over. Let's take a look at it. So we're going to make a graph, kind of an x and a y graph. And we have the point 0, 0, which is right here. Then we have pi over 2. So what we're going to do here, since the whole thing repeats itself once it gets to 2 pi, what we really want to do here is we want to put 2 pi on the graph. We need a halfway point, which is pi, and we want half of that too, which is our pi over 2, and then half of this one is our 3 pi over 2. That way we're all set up here. So it's 0, 0, it's pi over 2 is a 1, so we're going to go up 1, and pi over 2, 1. Then we go pi, 0, that's here. Then we go 3 pi over 2, negative 1, and then 2 pi, 0 again. And the graph's kind of doing this thing right here. And then it's going to keep doing it. It's going to actually come back up and hit a high point and come back down. It's going to do the same thing over here. This would be negative pi over 2, negative pi, etc. And that's your basic sine graph. Your basic sine graph starts at 0, 0. It takes 2 pi before it gets right back to where it was. Then it's just going to do that same thing again and the same thing again over and over again. And the key values, the highest it ever gets to is 1. The lowest it ever goes is negative 1. I didn't put negative 1 right there. There it is. Let's see what else. If it's the standard graph, like I said, it takes 2 pi. That means it's at 0 at the beginning at 0 and at 2 pi and in the middle. And it goes in between these two spots, it goes to its highest point, and in between these two spots, it gets to its lowest point. And that's it. That's a graph. That's a nice little easy sketch of y equals sine x. Cosine. Let's do it again. So cosine, same thing. You got 1, 0. You got 0, 1. You got negative 1, 0. And you got 0, negative 1. But now cosine is all the x values on the unit circle. Here, 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 here. We're still going to go 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. But this time it's the x value that matters. So the x value at 0 degrees, see we're going around the circle, 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi, going around and around. X value is cosine, so it's 1. Pi over 2 is 0. Pi, negative 1. 3 pi over 2, 0. And back to 1. Once again, if you're noticing, this is 0. Here's pi over 2 right here, and the x value is 0. So pi over 2, 0. This is pi, and the x value is negative 1. So pi, negative 1. This is 3 pi over 2 down here. The x value is 0. And when you get all the way back around, you're right back where you started, 2 pi. That's the x value of 1. This graph, just plot the points just like we were. Well, let's go ahead and start it out. We have 0 here. This is the 0 for x. We need to get to 2 pi. So we'll put a little dash over here and call this 2 pi. That makes this pi. That makes this pi over 2. And this is 3 pi over 2. The highest and lowest it's going to get is still 1 and negative 1. You can see that, same thing here, 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 here. In between there are all the square roots and stuff, and, so it's not, the highest we ever get is 1, lowest we ever get is -1. So that's why these values are on the graph. And we just plot 0, 1. Pi over 2, 0. Pi, -1. 3 pi over 2, 0. 2 pi, 1. Once again, I'm just pulling these values. For example, here's pi -1. So at pi, when I went over to pi on the x, it went down -1. Everything's in radians. Now, this is exactly the same graph as sine, only it's moved around a little bit. It's still going to do this kind of thing right here. Up and down, up and down. It just starts, when it's at 0, it starts up. Where sine started right here and went like this. This one starts up and goes like this. Go over to the other side, we could have our -pi over 2, which would be here. Then at -pi, you'd have this, and etc. It would go on forever. So a quick summary before we get into some shifting problems is y equals sine x. If I was trying to just do the quickest, simplest graph ever, it starts at 0, it takes 2 pi to finish, cut in half, cut in half, cut in half, and then you have a point. It goes like this, basically. It goes up and down. The key is it starts and ends. In its normal function, it starts and ends at 0. Where cosine starts up and then comes down. So it would still it still takes 2 pi to finish a cycle, but it's going to start and end at the same spot. You got your pi in the middle, got your pi over 2, got your 3 pi over 2, and it's going to go like this. So, but as you can see, in the end, it just ends up being, they're both these little cycle functions. This one, they look the same if you stare at them once they're all completed. But the key is right now, the main thing you need to understand is that sine starts at 0, cosine starts at 1. Let's look at another graph. All right, so we're back to sine. It's going to be very simple. We're back to a sine graph, but I put a number in the front. All this number does is it's whatever value you get here, it's multiplying it by 2. So it's making all those 1s turn into 2s. Doesn't change 0. 0 is still 0 times 2. So if I'm graphing this very quickly, I just go like this. I don't want it in green though. I go like this. I go like this. I want to, it takes 2 pi to finish the cycle, so I put 2 pi on there. I put a pi on there. I put pi over 2. I put 3 pi over 2. And then let's go ahead and do the other side. We're going to do a mirror image. It's going to be -2 pi, -pi, -pi over 2, and -3 pi over 2. The only thing that changes is still, remember, sine starts at 0, 0. It normally was going up to 1. We're going to call it 2 now. And -2. And that the reason it's going to go up higher now is because of the number in front of sine. That's it. You just go up, then you come back to the middle, then you go down, then you come back to the middle. Here you're going to go down, come back to the middle, up, come back to the middle. This graph looks like this. At any point, you could verify these by thinking about all the math you've done for the last couple of weeks. You could even put it in a calculator and see if you type 2 sine of, let's say, pi over 2, put a pi over 2 in there and hit enter, it's going to say 2. The value went up to 2, etc. You can kind of play around with this, make some sense out of it. The other thing we can do, maybe a little bit trickier, is we can add a number to the outside like this. This is not hooked to the x right now. There's no parenthesis here or anything. It's just the regular graph, but then plus 1. So for that one, what you do is you think about your normal graph. In fact, let me just draw another normal cosine graph for you. So I'm going to try to put 2 graphs on this paper. The normal cosine graph, once again, starts up, then goes to the middle, then goes down, then back up, then here. So it kind of goes like this. Or in other words, the center line, the center of the graph, since it goes down to here and it comes up to here, then the middle is the x-axis. All this number over here does is it shifts that middle line up 1. So our graph here is going to look like this. We're going to go up 1 and then put a dotted line there to kind of show that that's our new center of everything. And then this number in the front is what still makes it go up and down the amount. Remember on the last one it was a 2 here, so it went up 2 and down 2. Now it's just back to 1, so it's going to go up 1, down 1. But you're still thinking of the most basic cosine graph. So we're still going to 2 pi, pi over 2, 3 pi over 2. The normal cosine graph, you go up 1, so this will actually be the number 2 here, and it starts up. Remember, the graph starts, it doesn't start at its center line, it starts up, and it starts whatever that number is right there, which is a 1. So it went from the center line up to 1. Then it goes back to the middle, then it goes to its lowest point, which would be at, now that lowest point is going to be the x-axis. Because if the whole thing shifted up 1, now this is the center, and down 1 is actually right here, and up 1 is right here. So we go here, then back to the center, and then all the way up here. And this graph's going to look like that. So it's basically, this graph right here is this graph. It starts up, goes here, does that, still does that. Starts up, goes down, goes here, comes back up, middle, and then up. But instead of the center of everything being the x-axis, the center is now shifted up 1. That's because there was a plus 1. Let's do one more. I look at this one, it's the basic graph is sine. Then it's going to go up 3 and down 3, but that's after we shift it by 2. This 2, I put it over here this time in the front. This 2 could be here, or it could be over here plus 2 in this area. It's the same thing as the last one where it said plus 1. I just put it over here because you see it different ways. All right, basic sine graph, remember, starts at center, 0, 0, and goes like this. That's your basic sine graph. So we're going to think of a basic graph, but we're going to shift the center line up 2. Like that. And then from there, I'm going to make the regular sine graph where this is now kind of like my 0, 0, and I'm going to go up, down like this. But also I've got to go up 3 when I do it. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. So it's going to start here, go up 3, go down 3, graphing the standard sine graph. Let's put a 2 pi on here, a pi over 2, and a 3 pi over 2. And then it looks like this. Center, highest point, back to the center, lowest point, it's right here, and then back to the center. So that graph's going to look like that. We got a couple more lessons related to this. We're only graphing sine and cosine, and we're only for today doing two shifts, or a shift and then a stretch of the height of the function. And then the next lesson we can do a couple other things. We can change the signs, and we can put a number in parentheses over here, and that's about it. So we're kind of breaking it up, going slow for you. Once again, the number on the outside shifts the center line, and the number right next to the sine or cosine changes how high and how low it goes from the center line. And the standard sine graph starts at the middle at 0, 0 and goes like this, and the standard cosine graph starts up and then goes down and comes back up to the highest point. That's it. That's it for now. We got a lot more to cover, but this should get you started. All the graphs are very similar to the ones I've put in the video. So work hard, be nice, and I'll see you soon.